Hello YouTube. It's been more than 70 years from the incidents that I'm going to speak to you about today, but the story basically is as complicated as it was during World War II, and it shows you the complexities of the UFO research, but as well as interests of those who want to obscure what had really happened. And it is very interesting, and maybe someday we will know all the details, but let me tell you what I know now. Back in the early 1990s, I received a very interesting report from a Russian engineer, Konstantin Tuts, in Moscow. His field of expertise is electronics. Now, I have already discussed several installments of the unfolding saga of the Russian information about the strange flying objects in the skies of a war-torn Europe in the 1940s. Now, Tuts could not publish any part of the following account prior to the fall of the Soviet regime. He does not name the eyewitness in this story, but I have read the manuscript, and at that time I was completely convinced of the authenticity of the document, and I was confident of the veracity of the courageous man who wrote it. I have to tell you that I found out the name of the witness, but we'll get to it later. What's very interesting is that in the report, the so-called eyewitness in question had passed away in 1984, according to Tuts. That was the very same day that his acquaintance, engineer Tuts, had returned from Afghanistan. We will call this eyewitness X. His life was more than difficult. He went through hell that was real, man-made, and known as the Nazi Institute of Mankind. That was a place where German scientists conducted experiments on human beings, inmates of Nazi concentration camps. Some experiments were like those conducted by the Japanese Dr. Death researcher. Human beings were cut to pieces without the benefit of anesthesia. Body organs were taken away for research. When the Soviet Union was invaded by Nazis in June of 1941, young X was a soldier in the Red Army. After the first skirmishes in the Vinnytsia, that's in Ukraine, area, his unit initiated its retreat towards Kiev, the capital city. The soldiers were moving through forest tracks. They were badly outgunned. They shared an ancient rifle among 3 or 4 soldiers. Then, as they were approaching Kiev, marching on the open highway, per the orders of some stupid commissar, Nazi airplanes appeared in the skies above and began their slow, leisurely bombing raid. Only 5 soldiers survived. Among them was X, who was shell-shocked. The Germans took him and his comrades to a POW camp. X was then immersed into living hell. He starved, he was betrayed, he was dying of typhus, but he managed to survive and attempted an escape. Nazis caught him and sent him to Auschwitz. There he was employed as a medical orderly until he again contracted typhus. X was sent to the ovens. He recalls the nauseating smell of the burning human flesh as he stood in line to be dispatched into the crematorium oven. But X again survived. A German woman, a doctor, saved his life. Tuts said that in 1984, Izvestia, that's a famous Soviet newspaper, published an article about this doctor. Not only did she save X and help him get well, but she also provided him with false ID papers. He became a mechanical engineer. In August of 1943, X and some other prisoners were moved to a camp in the vicinity of Peenemünde, where the Nazis' camp was designated as, here it's KZ-84, and located in Trassenherde. The camp's purpose was to carry out the programs of the Hochruhpumpe project, removal of the consequences of the British bombing raids. The hangman of Auschwitz SS Brigadier Hans Kampler ordered prisoners to be transferred to the Peenemünde testing grounds. Major General Darenberger, head of the testing ground, had little time for the reconstruction work and therefore sanctioned the use of the concentration camp prisoners. In September of 1943, X inadvertently became a witness to something that is of great interest to UFO researchers. X was with a group of prisoners engaged in demolishing a reinforced concrete wall. During the lunch break, the group was driven away under guard. However, X remained at the demolition site because of dislocated foot. Later, he set the bone himself, but the truck with his fellow prisoners had already left. Suddenly, 4 workers rolled out on a concrete landing strip next to a nearby hangar, a weird-looking apparatus. X described it as round in perimeter with a drop-shaped cockpit in the center with small inflatable wheels. He said it looked like an upside-down wash basin. After a hand signal from a short, stout man, quivering in the wind, the strange apparatus, the color of heavy silvery metal, made a hissing sound and took off. It hovered at an altitude of approximately 5 meters over the landing strip, the hissing sound reminding X of a blow lamp. He noted that the outline of the apparatus clearly showed through on its silvery surface. For a short while, the device rocked like a tilting doll, and then the borders of the outline slowly began to blur as if it were going out of focus. Then it jumped up sharply like a humming top and gained altitude in a snake-like motion. The light, judging by the rocking of the apparatus, advanced erratically. A sudden gust of wind from the Baltic Sea turned the craft upside down, and it began to lose altitude rather sharply. X was enveloped in a mixture of smells, burning hot air and ethyl alcohol. He heard the apparatus impacting with the ground, the crunching and breaking of components. It hit the ground not far away from X. Instinctively, the inmate ran toward the crashed apparatus, thus revealing himself. But he had only one thought in his mind: to try to save the pilot, a human being. The pilot's body was hanging out of the broken cockpit, and the wreckage of the shell was gradually engulfed in a blue stream of fire. X saw the sharply exposed and still hissing jet engine. Another moment and the fire devoured everything. It is thought that what X had encountered that blustery Baltic day was experimental apparatus that had an engine installation, a modernized design of the jet engine for the Messerschmitt 262 aircraft. Fumes had passed over the airframe with the help of a guiding device, interacted with the surrounding air to create a rotatable cocoon of air medium around the design, thus forming an air pillow for the movement of the apparatus. In his papers, Toots listed the history of the development of similar type of aircraft and engines from 1931. In the USSR, there were ideas about the parametric engines, to the 1942 United States, to 1944 Germany, to 1960 USSR, and to 1975 United States, NASA program. Then the final was 1992 Kyrgyzstan development. Toots mentions the Prague airport test flight that the Nazi designers conducted in 1944 in occupied Czechoslovakia. Toots blasts the Russians who nowadays, well, this was in 1990s, wasted time and money on aircraft that had no prospects of flying. In his papers, he revealed that the Russian designers were working on new programs, high-speed rocket-assisted torpedoes and superguns, apparently based on the same failed technology as the 1940 apparatus that X had observed. Toots said that the money would be better spent on helping those who carry the burdens of World War II on their shoulders, that is, Soviet veterans. I had other information from Toots, who himself traveled in South America, which is very interesting. I know in Brazil, and we exchange information, and I mentioned some of his research in my video about Brazil. Now, he still is a serious researcher, very well versed engineer in my estimation. But here is something interesting. Apparently, according to a newspaper that was published the same year that my article about X appeared in UFO magazine, 1995, a newspaper that was published by the Russian Leningrad military region, it described this incident, but it gave a name. And according to them, the author of the report about this Nazi experiment was somebody named VP Konstantinov, who gave an interview, it doesn't state to whom, while he lived in the colony of Russian emigres in Uruguay. So we don't know when he actually lived there, Konstantinov, and when the interview was given. But the name of the concentration camp serving Peenemünde was KPA4, which is more correct than KZ84. But there must have been a misprint. The name of the newspaper was NLO, Наблюдения, Легенды, Открытия, UFO, Observations, Legends, and Discoveries. And the issues were 36 and 37 of 1995. But the report that Toots sent to me was prior to that. Again, the newspaper was a special project of the Leningrad military region publication Na Straže Rodiny, Defending the Motherland. So the Soviet military, I should say the Russian military, because there was no Soviet Union anymore, were also interested in the projects carried out by Nazis 60 years before it was published. Now, they were not the only ones interested, and that's very important. Sometime in the 1990s, reports were declassified of the CIA files, and the CIA, of course, took the interest in the Soviet Union, apparently, and also in the wartime period UFOs. One of the reports mentions this: German engineer states Soviets have German flying saucer experts and plans. And this was a Greek publication, a newspaper in Athens, if I can pronounce it correctly, Ivredini, on May 13, 1953. The information from the CIA declassified document apparently was obtained from a Greek source. The CIA documents publication date was August 17, 1953. It was released on November 16, 1978. The document was analyzed in Vienna by some entity titled Special Service. The document states that according to recent reports from Toronto, a number of Canadian Air Force engineers were engaged in the construction of a flying saucer to be used as a future weapon of war. The work of these engineers was being carried out in great secrecy at the A.B. Rowe Company factories. Now, this was transliterated from the Greek. Flying saucers have been known to be an actuality since the possibility of their construction was proven in plans drawn by German engineers toward the end of World War II. George Klein, a German engineer, stated that though many people believed the flying saucers to be a post-war development, they were actually in the planning stage in German aircraft factories as early as 1941. Klein said that he was an engineer in the ministry of Albert Speer. In 1942, Speer was the minister of the armament and ammunition for Nazi Reich. And Klein was present in Prague on February 14, 1945, at the first experimental flight of a flying saucer. During the experiment, Klein reported the flying saucer reached an altitude of 12,400 meters within 3 minutes and a speed of 2,200 kilometers per hour. Klein emphasized that in accordance with German plans, the speed of these saucers would reach 4,000 kilometers per hour. One difficulty, according to Klein, was the problem of obtaining the materials to be used for the construction of the saucers. But even this had been solved by German engineers toward the end of 1945, and construction on the object was scheduled to begin. Klein went on to state that the 3 experimental models had been readied for test by the end of 1944. That's how it said in the newspaper. Built according to 2 completely different principles of aerodynamics. One type actually had the shape of a disc with an interior cabin and was built at the Mitte, that was unidentified transliteration from the Greek, Mitte factories, which had also built the V2 rockets. This model was 42 meters in diameter. The other model had the shape of a ring with raised sides and spherically shaped pilot's cabin placed on the outside in the center of the ring. This model was built at the Habermohl and Schreiber factories. Unidentified, stated the CIA, as both names transliterated from the Greek. But as far as I know, these locations in the following years were well known to the ufologists who pursued the German trail, here and in the Soviet Union. Both models had the ability to take off vertically and to land in an extremely restricted area, like helicopters. During the last few days of the war, when every hope for German victory had been abandoned, the engineers in the group stationed in Prague carried out orders to completely destroy their plans of their model before the Soviet forces arrived. The engineers at the Mitte factories in Breslau, however, were not warned in sufficient time of the Soviet approach, and the Soviet forces therefore succeeded in seizing their material. Plans, as well as specialized personnel, were immediately sent directly to the Soviet Union under heavy guard, coincidental with the departure from Berlin of the creator of the Stuka U-87 dive bomber. The name who later developed the MiG-13 and 15 in the Soviet Union. Klein had more to say. But pertaining to the German experiments in World War II, this is where I'll stop. In my books, I mentioned the CIA operation in the Urals in the Soviet Union and the German scientists working in the Soviet Union on another secret program. And there was actually an American agent involved in the operation who made it out from the Soviet Union alive, who mentioned 5 flying saucers built by the Soviets. I just wanted to show you the complicated history of the experiments that took place so long ago and the interest from the Russian military publication, as well as the reports that CIA declassified about 40 years ago. So as you can see, we still don't know really what happened, but I think it's very interesting to go on. If you like my videos, please subscribe. Thank you.